India has refused to pick a side in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. You may be wondering what their reason might be. Well, let's just say India is trying to strike a balance between its connections with Moscow and the West. Believe me, India has had to walk a diplomatic tightrope concerning the war in Ukraine for months now. They have, however, expressed disappointment concerning demands from the world community to give diplomacy and dialogue a chance, which had not been heeded in its opening statement to the UN Security Council. However, Delhi also received requests from Russia, the US, and Ukraine to do the right thing before the UNSC voted on a draft UN resolution condemning the invasion. Russia and Ukraine even made public pleas for Delhi to adopt a stance. India chose to abstain from the vote, but a close examination of its statement reveals that it actually went above what was expected and carefully urged Moscow to uphold international law. India emphasized the significance of the United Nations Charter, international law, and respect for states' sovereignty and territorial integrity, adding that all member states ought to honor these principles in finding a constructive path forward. Delhi stuck to its plan and decided to abstain as the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to demand that the invasion of Ukraine end immediately. The third abstention was followed by calls from senior officials in Washington to India to take a clear position. India's strategy has raised questions, particularly in the West, over whether the world's largest democracy should have taken a clearer stand. According to J.N. Misra, a former Indian diplomat, India has bad and worse options to choose from. One cannot simultaneously tilt in both directions. India hasn't mentioned any nations, demonstrating that it won't oppose Moscow. India has to be careful when choosing a side, and it has, he adds. India's efforts to strike a diplomatic balance concerning Ukraine are motivated by several factors. The most significant are India's established diplomatic and defense ties with Moscow. The S-400 missile system is important for India's defense requirements. Despite a stake reduction from 70% to 49% as a result of India's intention to diversify its holdings and increase its domestic defense industry, Russia remains India's top supplier of weaponry. Also, despite warnings of impending US sanctions, India moved ahead with the acquisition because Russia is giving weapons like the S-400 missile defense system, which gives India significant strategic deterrence against China and Pakistan. Furthermore, Delhi finds it difficult to ignore the years of diplomatic cooperation with Russia on a wide range of issues. For the benefit of India, Moscow has in the past used its veto power to block UNSC resolutions regarding the disputed Kashmir region. In this situation, India seems to be adhering to its well-known non-alignment policy and encouraging discussion to settle differences. According to Michael Kugelman, deputy director at the Wilson Center think tank, India's stance is not unexpected because it's consistent with its prior policy. Delhi seems uncomfortable with what is occurring in Ukraine, but it is not likely to modify its position. He claims that due to its current need for geopolitical stability and defense, it simply cannot afford to do so. Nevertheless, he notes that Delhi has used some forceful language in the UNSC to signal that it is uncomfortable about the circumstances in Ukraine. Positive connections exist between PM Modi and President Putin. Additionally, India faces the challenging task of attempting to remove 20,000 people from Ukraine, primarily students. Anil Triguniat, a former Indian diplomat who worked in Moscow and also in Libya, where he oversaw the evacuation of Indian nationals when war broke out in 2011, claims that for an evacuation operation to be successful, assurances of safety are required from all parties involved in the conflict. India cannot take a position that could jeopardize the security of its citizens. Additionally, it's seeing the big picture, which necessitates maintaining open lines of communication with everyone. India was able to secure assistance from both Ukraine and Russia to evacuate its residents, particularly from the severely damaged city of Kyiv. Hundreds of its people, largely students, are still stuck in Ukraine, and they will keep requesting cooperation from all parties. India is in a unique position in this regard because it's one of the few nations that enjoys cordial ties with both Washington and Moscow. While Foreign Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar spoke with Washington authorities, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Mr. Modi had spoken in the past. According to Mr. Trigonyat, India has done well in maintaining diplomatic relations with both sides. India hasn't directly criticized Russia, but that doesn't mean it is ignoring the pain of Ukrainians. It has chosen a fair strategy. It made a compelling case for territorial integrity of the UNSC and was obviously intended to draw attention to Ukraine's situation. In Przemysl, Poland, a makeshift camp has been established for some of the hundreds of thousands who are escaping Ukraine. However, India may find it difficult to continue doing business with Moscow if Washington and its European allies continue to implement harsh sanctions against Russia. Currently, it appears that the US is aware of India's position, but there's no guarantee that this will always be the case. When asked lately about India's position, US President Joe Biden remained evasive. With regard to Ukraine, we will speak with India. We haven't really resolved that, he said. Sanctions related to the S-400 purchase are still a concern. The Countering America's Adversaries Through Penalties Act, CAATSA, was introduced in 2017 to impose political and economic sanctions on North Korea, Iran, and Russia. Additionally, it forbids any government from forming defense agreements with certain countries. Even before Russia attacked Ukraine, Washington had not made any waiver promises, and experts think that this could become a negotiating point between India and the US. If Moscow notices a shift in Delhi's approach, it may utilize its own pressure points, such as bolstering ties with Pakistan, India's bitter adversary. In the last 20 years, India's connections to the US have grown, but Ukraine is a line that Moscow does not want Delhi to cross. According to Mr. Kugelman, such tipping points won't occur until the crisis in Ukraine continues and eventually results in the emergence of a bipolar world. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that. However, if that happens, India's foreign policy will be put to the test. Indian officials are currently much more concerned with the former issues. They have predicted that Washington will be far more understanding about India's public neutrality toward Russia, even if it occasionally chastises New Delhi about the same, since Washington seeks New Delhi's support in dealing with the threat presented by China in the Indo-Pacific. Indian authorities have also concluded that Washington will let them off the hook as long as India continues to work with the United States to restrain Chinese assertiveness, because India matters more to the United States in the Indo-Pacific than it ever could in Europe. In that sense, New Delhi seems to have placed a wager that wasn't just self-serving, but also turned out to be beneficial. In light of the losses that could have resulted from giving up its interests, India's sacrifice of its morals seems to have paid off. When Jai Shankar said, "We watch what's happening in the world as any other country does, and we draw our conclusions and make our judgments," he was referring to this calculus. And trust me, we know what is in our best interests and how to develop and safeguard them. We now have more options than we did previously, which, in my opinion, is part of what has changed. From New Delhi's perspective, the concerns offered by declining Russian influence or closer Sino-Russian connections present considerably larger risks. But these are toxic scenarios for which India currently has no meaningful solutions, outside its persistent efforts to look impartial. India's only option at the moment is to hope for the best, while hoping that the United States will see the long-term benefits of refraining from penalizing Russia so severely that Moscow moves even further into Beijing's embrace, which, according to Indian policymakers, would be detrimental to both New Delhi and Washington at the same time. By the way, these yearnings also show the existing limitations of the frequently claimed value convergence between the United States and India. Although India received no ovation for its attitude on the Ukraine war, its awkward neutrality toward Russia is unlikely to change anytime soon, due to the persistent primacy of interests in its approach to the world. Alright guys, that concludes our video for today. Please do well to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more.